Hi. Hey, kitty.
Hey, don't get distracted. Hi, my name's Gary J, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to build a computer. So, the process for building a computer, no matter what kind of computer you're building, is going to be pretty much the same. So this guide applies to if you're building a computer for your grandma or building a computer for your girlfriend. Anyway, this build is going to be a mini ITX build, so it's going to be really small. I mean, it's pretty big for a mini ITX case, but we'll forget about that. And it's going to be geared toward video editing, so it's going to be rather powerful. We have a lot of multi-threaded parts, or multi-threaded CPU, pretty high-end motherboard, a lot of storage that you usually wouldn't need in something like a gaming PC. So, like I said, we're going to have pretty high-end parts that you wouldn't necessarily need for a home or office PC, but for a gaming PC or a video editing PC, it's actually pretty standard to have rather expensive, more high-end parts. Here we have our motherboard, which is a ASRock Z370 board. Ignore where it says Republic of Gamers, it is lying to you. Here we have our processor, which is an i7-8700K. We have our RAM, 16 gigabytes of it, our SSD, our CPU cooler, our thermal paste, our two 1 terabyte WD Blue hard drives, our Corsair power supply, 750 watts, and of course the pièce de résistance, I can't speak French, but there you go, the graphics card. Okay, so you're going to need some things before you start building a computer. First and foremost, you're going to need your assistant, who is going to make the process absolutely hairy. Anyways, cats aside, you'll always want a very clean workstation when you're building your computer. You want to make sure you have all your parts somewhat organized. Mine are a little all over the place. You'll also always want to wear either rubber gloves or a magnetic wrist strap. One little shock of static can actually fry your motherboard and potentially anything down the line as well. I said can, not will. I won't be wearing a magnetic wrist strap today because do as I say, not as I do not question. So your first step in building a computer is going to be putting your CPU in. You want to get that in there as fast as possible because, well, you don't want to bend any pins if you don't have a CPU cover, and it is a bad time if you bend one of these pins. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to line up wherever you see an arrow on the corner. ASRock's really bad about putting it. It'll be on that corner, I believe. So you'll see the little tab right there where there's an arrow, and then you slot it in very gently. And then just give it a little push. And it's in there. Okay, so next we're going to put in our M.2 SSD, which is 128 gigabytes. If you're building a computer, get a bigger SATA. They're really, really, really cheap. You're just going to slot it in very gingerly to the slot that in my case says Ultra M.2. And you're going to take your tiny ass screw and you're going to try to line it up. Oh god. Cut. Once you've finally gotten your SSD in there after fiddling with the screw for a bit, you'll be putting in your RAM. And to do this, you'll pull these little tabs back. Make sure that the little notch in the RAM slot lines up with the little notch in your RAM, and you'll put it in. Don't be afraid to push it a little, because they are sometimes a bit stubborn. After that, you're going to have to install your CPU cooler, which is the last thing you do on your motherboard before you put it in the case. So in order to do that with this particular mounting mechanism, you have to sit in a chair and cry. I've already kind of fixed it off camera because it's super boring and every CPU cooler is different, so it doesn't really matter. What does matter is thermal paste. Now, we do this because CPUs give off a lot of heat. They're actually very, very inefficient. You're gonna wanna put a little pea-sized goop on there. Some people like to go ham and just put a crap ton on there. I wouldn't recommend that. You're gonna make a mess of your socket, but so basically that's gonna keep your CPU nice and cool so your computer doesn't, like, you know, overheat. So what I'm doing right now is securing the heatsink on top of the thermal paste. We need to make sure that we get a nice even distribution. Once that's attached, you basically just gotta put your fan on. Again, every CPU cooler is going to be different, so every CPU cooler is going to be annoying in its own special way. So here we got our fan. And you're going to want to hook this fan up to the CPU fan header, which is right here. So you got a little cable, just tuck it to the side, make sure it's nice and neat. And I usually have to manhandle it a little bit to make it the way I want, but just slide that in, make sure all the pins make contact, and you are good to go. For this build in particular, we are using 2 hard drives. In your standard build today, people don't use hard drives. Like, they're a dying technology. My friend, who is going to be using this computer, needs a lot of space for storing raw video footage and for holding their games library. So we are going to be putting 2 hard drives in RAID 0. All you do with these is you line up these things with the holes that are on the side. I'm sure if you find one you could figure it out. And then with this case in particular, and with most cases nowadays, you just take it and you just slide it into the slot where it fits. It'll give a little click and then it's in there. Once you're done playing with ancient technology, you'll be putting in the most important part of, well, second most important part of your build, the power supply. This basically just takes power from the wall, turns it into a currency that your computer can handle, and then distributes it. Basically, you're just gonna slide this in. You're just push it. You're gonna pray that nothing breaks. It's important to get your cables on the correct side, which I haven't, because you want it to be kind of neat, kind of good looking inside. You don't want to restrict airflow too much. I mean, I don't think it does, but you want to make sure that, like, you know that when you put your motherboard in, your ATX connector, which is this big one, is going to be on the right-hand side. So you're going to pull it through like that. Then you're going to screw your power supply in. You're a bunch of intelligent people. I'm sure you can figure out how to screw in something. Basically, the only way to screw this up, get it? Because puns. Anyway, the only way to screw this up is to just strip your screws, which I've never done in my life, ever, on this build or any other time in my life. Don't worry about it. Okay, so your next step is going to be putting the motherboard in. Now, the people that made this case have been so kind enough to put our motherboard pegs already in. In a normal build, you would have to screw these in by hand, and it would be such a pain. Of course, you're going to want to put your motherboard backplate in if you happen to have one, and you'll just line it up like so. Make sure everything has its place. Hear a little pop, because there is a cable in the way. Not a problem. Just, you know. I would generally advise you be a little more careful with your motherboard than I am being right now. Then you take your motherboard screws, or whatever screws you happen to be using. The main thing is your motherboard screws have to be flat on the bottom. They can't have the little ridges, because if they do, they will tear apart the shielding that you have, which it looks like this motherboard has already been torn apart just a bit. I'm going to go up and through and screw in each one of the places where there is a motherboard standoff. So the next thing you're going to want to do is plug in all your cables. Your 24-pin, your CPU cable, basically if the slot fits, plug it in. What you're going to do now is you're going to take your front panel connectors, which is your power, your reset switch, your audio, microphone, and USB 3 or USB 2, depending on your case. And you're going to connect them to these pinouts here and this slot here. Sometimes motherboards are a little bit different. Typically they're used the standard and they are labeled. You can see there's HDD, LED, positive, negative, reset switch. It's a big pain in the ass. I'm not gonna film the whole thing, but just know that you're gonna need to either look on your motherboard or in your motherboard manual in order to find which pinouts go to what.
Oh my god. It's probably gonna take more than 15 minutes.
Okay, so the final step, I glazed over some stuff here, but the final step of our project is going to be the most exciting part, and also the least exciting part, the GPU, and then putting the case back together. I already put this side on, so that one's good. What you're going to want to do with your GPU is make sure that you don't touch these fingers, because computers, as a general rule, don't really care for grease. You're going to very carefully line it up. Make sure that this tab is back, similar to what you did with the RAM. You're going to line it up, and you are going to have to give it a little bit of oomph to get it in there. The heavier your GPU, the more oomph you'll need, or the less oomph you need. So it's going to slot in. Don't push too hard, because I have seen people break their motherboards in half. And then you're going to line this doohickey up like that. And you just basically screw it in. If you eat it, I swear to God, buddy. So once you got your GPU slotted in, you're going to want to give it power. So you're going to want to take your 6-pin and your 8-pin, or whatever pinouts your GPU happens to use, and you're going to want to plug them in up top. And then you're going to want to take all of the pieces of your case. In this case we have a top piece, side piece right there, and we're going to want to just slot them back in. Alright, after you've got everything assembled, everything's good, you want to power it on, make sure all the fans spin, and they're all working. Hook it up to a display, make sure it posts, and you got yourself a computer. Haley, your cameraman, Jeremy.